Have you ever found yourself, sifting through the news, trying to really grasp a complex geopolitical issue, but the pieces just don't quite seem to align?
Yeah, it happens all the time, doesn't it?
Well, today we're diving deep into exactly that kind of puzzle. The long-standing tension around Iran's nuclear program.
Ah, yes. A topic with a lot of history and, frankly, a lot of baggage.
Exactly. And we're going to explore some really fascinating and honestly quite surprising source material. It's from Gareth Porter's book, Manufactured Crisis, The Untold Story of the Iran Nuclear Scare.
I'm familiar with it. Porter's work definitely challenges the mainstream narrative.
It really does. It argues that much of what we thought we knew about this whole critical issue might actually be, well, a carefully constructed narrative.
Right. Put together for specific reasons, perhaps.
So our mission in this deep dive is to try and cut through some of that noise, look at the evidence presented, and maybe uncover the real history behind decades of international pressure and suspicion.
Sounds good. Get ready to maybe reconsider the story a bit.
I think so.
What's truly striking here, and what Porter emphasizes, is how deeply ingrained certain narratives can become, and our collective understanding,
Absolutely.
Which makes it absolutely critical to go back and examine the underlying facts, or at least the facts as presented by different sources. So this deep dive, it really aims to recover that history, shining a light on what U.S. and Israeli officials and even international bodies often told the public versus the reality, or at least a different reality, unearthed through deeper inquiry. We'll be exploring how a specific narrative, one portraying Iranian behavior as clear evidence of a secret weapons program.
How that narrative was built.
Exactly. How it was deliberately crafted according to the source and then amplified. Sometimes through, let's say, less than critical used media.
Okay.
So this isn't just about what happened, but maybe more importantly, why we were told what we were told and the implications of that.
Right. The storytelling itself becomes part of the story. Okay, so you might instinctively assume Iran's nuclear program began with some kind of secret, aggressive dash for a bomb. That's the usual starting point, isn't it?
It often is, yes. That's the impression many people have.
But our sources today, particularly Porter's analysis, they paint a very different picture. Actually, quite an ironic origin story.
How so?
While the book Manufactured Crisis reveals that the true beginning, the spark of what we now call the Iran nuclear issue in international politics, it wasn't actually an Iranian desire for weapons. Not at all.
Okay, so what was it then?
It was, believe it or not, a U.S.-enforced embargo on nuclear cooperation with Iran's quite modest peaceful program.
An embargo on peaceful cooperation. When was this?
This started way back in 1984.
Wow, okay. That's earlier than many people realize.
Much earlier. And the U.S. explicitly challenged Iran's right to any peaceful nuclear power program, even though that right is supposedly guaranteed under Article 4 of the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Right. The right to peaceful use is fundamental to the treaty bargain.
Exactly. And this, the source calls it a naked use of U.S. power. It essentially forced Iran into this impossible choice.
Which was?
Either completely abandon its treaty-given right to nuclear technology or figure out how to get its own enrichment capability independently.
So, backed into a corner, essentially.
It's the argument.
Yeah.
To put this in perspective, Iran had originally planned to rely on Western European firms for enriched uranium, for finishing the Bushehr reactor.
Right. They had contracts, did they?
Yeah.
With German and French companies initially.
They did. And former Ambassador Said Hossein Mousavian recalled France and Germany directly refusing to provide fuel, refusing to complete the reactor.
And did they say why?
Explicitly, they apparently stated it was an international decision, which, according to Mousavian, was code for U.S. pressure, intense U.S. pressure.
So direct intervention.
Absolutely direct. This U.S. intervention in 83-84 even went so far as blocking technical help from the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Help with what specifically?
Help for fuel production and uranium conversion, basic stuff for a peaceful program.
And this was even though Iran was in good standing with the NPT at the time.
Correct. No evidence of violations then. The justification given was purely geopolitical. Basically, fears of Iran becoming too dominant in the region.
That sounds like a policy with potentially massive and maybe unintended consequences, wouldn't you say?
It seems that way looking back.
Absolutely. And if we broaden our perspective here, connect this to the bigger picture, this U.S. policy, according to Porter, didn't just violate the spirit, maybe even the letter of the NPT,
Right.
but it directly, almost inevitably, led to Iran's decision to pursue self-sufficiency, in uranium enrichment.
So the very thing the West later became so concerned about?
Was arguably a direct consequence of earlier Western, specifically U.S., policy. It was a pivotal moment, really shaping the course of this crisis for decades.
So the key insight there is that, far from being some unprovoked dash for a bomb,
Iran's enrichment program, at least its origins, could be seen as a reaction, a direct consequence of external pressure and this denial of rights.
Okay. And while that was happening, what about Israel's role in this early phase?
Right. Porter also details how Israeli governments, particularly from 92 to 99, under Prime Ministers Rabin and then Netanyahu,
Yes.
they strategically used the alleged threat from Iran's nuclear and missile programs. But maybe not for the reasons you'd think.
What reasons, then?
To achieve unrelated political aims, according to the book, they professed alarm about an Iranian threat. But surprisingly, Israel's own top intelligence officials, including Mossad, apparently did not accept that level of threat at the time.
Really? Their own intelligence didn't see Iran as the top threat, then?
Not the primary one now.
Oh, yeah.
This heightened alarm, Porter argues, helped gather domestic support, for instance, for peace talks with the PLO.
How so?
By portraying this generalized twin threat of Iran and Shiites in the region in the most lurid terms possible. It created a sense of urgency, perhaps.
So leveraging an external fear for internal politics.
That's the analysis, and Israel's own intelligence assessments at the time, reportedly, considered Iran maybe a second or even third level risk.
And who was top of their list, then?
Priorities then were apparently the Palestinian Intifada, Syria, and Iraq. Iran wasn't yet the primary focus internally that it later became publicly.
Okay, so we've seen how external pressure might have fueled Iran's drive for self-sufficiency and how Israel, according to this source, leveraged perceived threats. Fast forward a bit to the early 2000s.
Things escalate.
Yeah, the narrative shifts again, from denying technology to outright accusations of a covert weapons program. And these accusations often kicked off with these dramatic but maybe carefully orchestrated events.
Right. The way information came out is key.
Here's where it gets really captivating, I think. A prime example. The discovery of Iran's Natanz enrichment facility, August 2002.
Ah, yes, the MEK press conference.
Exactly. It wasn't some IAEA inspection finding. It was announced by the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, the MEK, an Iranian opposition group, in Washington.
And MEK, they weren't exactly viewed neutrally by the U.S. government at the time.
Far from it. They were actually designated a terrorist organization by the U.S. back then, and our sources, Porter specifically, reveal this announcement was a carefully constructed bit of political theater.
Theater. How so?
Well, the book claims the MEK was actually given this intelligence
By whom?
by Israel's Mossad. And Mossad apparently used the MEK to sort of launder this information, to get it to the IAEA without revealing the true source, shielding themselves.
Okay, that's quite a claim. Using a designated terrorist group as an intelligence cutout.
It is. Now, Iran was being secretive about Natanz, no question. And that secrecy was definitely portrayed by many as damning evidence, proof of a hidden weapons program.
The secrecy itself became the story.
But Porter's book argues it was more of a calculated response.
To what?
To a few key things. First, the continued U.S. diplomatic efforts to stop Iran getting independent enrichment. Second, those explicit Israeli military threats against Iran's nuclear sites back in the late 90s.
So they felt threatened.
Apparently, yes. Iranian strategists, according to the book, genuinely believed that if they notified the IAEA officially before the facility was operational,
It would be attacked or sabotaged.
that hostile responses would be triggered, risking the whole project. And then you had President George W. Bush's Axis of Evil speech in January 2002.
Right, which lumped Iran in with Iraq and North Korea.
Exactly. That just heightened the perception of threat, made them feel even more targeted. So their secrecy, while looking bad externally.
Internally, it was seen as defensive, pragmatic.
In their view, yes. A pragmatic response to what they saw as a very real existential threat.
This really raises a profoundly important question, doesn't it? How does information, especially when it's filtered through politically motivated channels, maybe like the MEK in this instance, how does that shape public perception and ultimately policy?
Yeah, how does that initial framing stick?
Well, the IAEA's initial investigations and the media coverage that followed in 2003-2004, they provide a stark, almost textbook example, according to Porter.
What happened there?
Initial reports, widely publicized, suggested Iran had been secretly enriching uranium for like 18 years, or sometimes a combined 30 years. based on some early admissions of brief centrifuge tests back in '99 and 2002.
Okay, 18 years sounds like a long time, a major effort.
It does. However, later, more detailed IAEA reports clarified these tests involved tiny amounts, like
Yeah.
milligram amounts.
Milligrams, that's minuscule.
Exactly. Or experiments that only enriched uranium up to maybe 0.8%.
And just for perspective, weapons grade is.
Typically over 90% enriched. So 0.8% is. It's practically nothing in comparison. Like a pinch of salt in a massive lake, nowhere near bomb material.
But that clarification didn't make the headlines in the same way.
Apparently not. This crucial nuance, this context, was largely ignored by much of the news media, which just kept portraying this picture of a vast clandestine nuclear effort. And Porter argues this highlights a pattern of manipulation, even invention of facts marshaled to achieve dubious U.S. and Israeli policy objectives.
Strong words.
It demonstrates how an initial, maybe incomplete picture, amplified without enough critical examination, can quickly cement a misleading narrative, one that's hard to correct later.
Right. Okay, so moving forward again to 2004, another bombshell drops. This cache of laptop documents.
The infamous laptop documents. Yeah.
Supposedly from an actual Iranian nuclear weapons research program, these became absolutely central, almost a smoking gun for those pushing for much stronger action against Iran.
They were presented as definitive proof, weren't they?
Absolutely. But again, our sources, particularly Porter, indicate these documents were ultimately provided. Guess who?
Let me guess.
Right.
The MEK again. Sourced from Israel.
Bingo. According to the book, yes. And what's truly astonishing here is that a senior German official, Carsten Voigt, he publicly warned about this in 2004, said the documents came from an Iranian dissident group and shouldn't be the basis for policy towards Iran.
A public warning from Germany.
Yes. German intelligence, the BND, they'd received the documents from an MEK-affiliated source they considered doubtful, especially, after the whole curveball disaster regarding Iraq WMDs.
Right. Curveball's intelligence was completely fabricated, so they were wary.
Extremely wary. Yet this warning from a key ally like Germany was apparently largely ignored by the U.S.
That's troubling. Were there other red flags about the documents themselves?
Oh, yes. Big ones. Intelligence analysts, when they actually looked closely, found significant technical flaws, things that should have set off alarm bells immediately.
Like what?
Well, the research itself, depicted in these documents, described as primitive and not very good work.
Primitive. Not exactly a sophisticated weapons program, then.
Doesn't sound like it. Simulations run by Sandia National Laboratories, a top U.S. nuclear lab, showed that none of the 18 missile reentry vehicle designs shown in the documents would have actually worked.
None of them.
None. Furthermore, the documents showed zero communication between the three supposed main projects: the missile redesign, high explosives testing, uranium conversion.
Which you'd expect in a coordinated program.
Absolutely. It's highly suspicious for something being touted as Iran's equivalent of the Manhattan Project, implying this huge coordinated effort.
Right. A real program would have integration.
And maybe most strikingly, the actual missile reentry vehicle shown in the schematics, it didn't even match the one on the improved Shahab-3 missile that Iran actually flight tested successfully in August 2004.
So the documents were outdated? Or just wrong?
They didn't match reality. And Iran's redesign of that missile had been underway since 2000, apparently, long before the earliest dates found in the laptop document.
Wow. Those technical flaws seem, well, pretty glaring in retrospect.
They really do. So how did such obviously dubious evidence with warnings from allies manage to become such a central piece of the argument for action? What does that suggest about the intelligence process at the time? Well, it's a chilling echo of past intelligence failures, isn't it? Thinking back to Iraq.
It certainly feels that way.
What truly stands out here, according to Porter's analysis, is how these technical flaws, these questionable origins, they were often just completely overshadowed.
By what?
By the political imperative to use them. The very reason initially cited for their authenticity, remember, they were initially sold as being technically sophisticated.
Right.
That was directly contradicted by the actual technical analysis. Sandia Lab saying they wouldn't work.
Incredible.
So this whole episode, Porter argues, highlights a systemic failure of U.S. intelligence, one that tragically paralleled the Iraq WMD debacle.
And why did this failure happen, according to the source?
Well, the CIA's Non-Proliferation Center, the NPC, later called WINPAC, the part focused on stopping WMD spread. They apparently had this deep predisposition to find WMD programs.
A confirmation bias, almost.
You could call it that. Porter suggests they essentially reversed the burden of proof. Instead of needing solid evidence that a program existed, they needed proof it didn't exist.
Pretty much. Requiring evidence of absence, which is notoriously difficult, and even human intelligence, actual spies on the ground, that got manipulated too.
How?
There's an account of one CIA operative, just referred to as Doe in the book. Doe apparently found reliable sources indicating Iran had never intended to weaponize. Crucial information, right?
Absolutely crucial.
But his superiors reportedly instructed him not to prepare a written report and even threatened his career to suppress this intelligence.
That's deeply disturbing. Suppressing contradictory intelligence.
It reveals a potentially disturbing pattern within parts of the intelligence community itself, where maybe predetermined conclusions could override actual ground intelligence.
Okay, so amidst all these external accusations, these intelligence failures, these politically driven narratives, what about Iran itself, its own internal stance, its motivations?
Right, because that often gets lost.
Our deep dive reveals some internal dynamics that were often completely missed or maybe just ignored in the public narrative back then. Well, a key detail is Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's fatwa, his religious edict against nuclear weapons.
Yes, the fatwa. Often debated whether it was genuine or just for show.
Exactly. It was first issued in 2003, and he repeated it several times. Porter argues this wasn't just propaganda. It was apparently rooted quite deeply in Islamic principles. Drawing parallels to a previous fatwa, Iran had issued against using chemical weapons even when they were being used against them during the Iran-Iraq War.
Okay, so there's a precedent based on religious reasoning.
Yes. And importantly, this fatwa apparently served to enforce an internal injunction, a stop order on any work related to nuclear weapons.
So it had practical effect inside Iran.
According to the source, yes. It was actually used to curb some unauthorized research that might have been happening by elements within the military, like the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Research that wasn't approved at the top.
Research not approved by the Supreme National Security Council. So the fatwa was a tool for internal control, not just external messaging.
Interesting. Beyond the religious side, what about strategy?
Well, Iran's decision to pursue uranium enrichment, even while possibly forbidding weaponization, was also clearly driven by a strategic concept, something called latent deterrence.
Latent deterrence, what's that?
The belief, essentially, that just by having the capability to enrich uranium, meaning the technical know-how, the infrastructure, that capability itself would deter adversaries from attacking.
So you don't need the actual bomb, just the ability to make one relatively quickly if you had to.
Exactly. The potential is the deterrent. And this isn't just an Iranian idea. Think about former CIA Director Michael Hayden. He acknowledged back in 2012 that a U.S. attack on Iran would probably guarantee that which we're trying to prevent, an Iran that will spare nothing to build a nuclear weapon.
So attacking them would make them definitely go for the bomb. That was his assessment. And this idea, this fear of triggering the very thing you want to stop, it errantly played out concretely in 2007.
What happened then?
Well, according to reports, a combination of top U.S. officials, Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Peter Pace, Admiral William Fallon.
A powerful group.
They effectively blocked proposals coming from President Bush and Vice President Cheney to actually attack Iranian nuclear facilities.
So the deterrence concept, whether latent or otherwise, actually worked in that instance to prevent an attack.
It arguably did, yes, combined with assessments of the consequences. So how did this internal strategic thinking, this latent deterrence idea, and these public declarations like the fatwa, how did that all interact with the constant external pressure and accusation?
It seems like a really complex picture.
It really does. It reveals this complex interplay of internal Iranian policy, their strategic calculations, and the external pressures they faced, showing that the threat perceived outside and the actual intent inside, well, they were often dramatically different.
Okay, looking at the bigger context then, maybe the later period, say 2009 to 2013.
Right, the Obama administration years, coinciding with Netanyahu in Israel. Porter describes this period as witnessing an intricate political charade.
A charade? Between whom?
Between the Obama administration and Netanyahu's government in Israel. Netanyahu dramatically heightened the public threat of war against Iran's nuclear sites. Really ramped up the rhetoric. But at the same time, studies by the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, and the CIA concluded Israel actually lacked the capability for a successful unilateral strike.
Lacked the capability? Like what?
But specifically, things like enough aerial refueling tankers to get their jets there and back, and the right kind of bunker buster bombs needed to destroy buried facilities like Fordo.
So the U.S. military assessment was that Israel couldn't actually pull off a successful solo attack.
That's what the intelligence reportedly concluded.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, the Obama administration, while it was launching cyber warfare against Iran, the Stuxnet virus, the Olympic Games program, they also seemed to effectively use the threat of an Israeli attack, even one they perhaps knew wasn't feasible, as leverage
Leverage for what?
to impose more aggressive international sanctions on Iran. U.S. officials would actually leak information to the media suggesting Israeli strike was imminent.
Even when their own intelligence contradicted that.
According to Porter, yes. A kind of diplomatic theater using the threat of war.
Wow. And here's a truly surprising fact from the book. In 2011, Meir Dagan,
The former head of Mossad, a very respected figure in Israeli intelligence.
right, he publicly broke ranks with Netanyahu, stated very clearly there was no need to contemplate the use of military force.
Why not?
Because, Dagan said, Iran was at least 5 years away from having a nuclear bomb, and crucially, that an attack would be disastrous for Israel.
So the former Mossad chief essentially confirmed, on the record, what U.S. intelligence supposedly already knew.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Directly undermining the urgent, heightened rhetoric coming from his own government at the time.
That is incredibly revealing. The former head of Mossad basically blowing the whistle on the narrative.
It really undercuts the whole pretext for those heightened threats, doesn't it?
It certainly seems to.
Wow. We've certainly covered a tremendous amount of ground today, really peeling back the layers of what was so often presented as this straightforward, imminent nuclear threat from Iran.
It's a very different picture when you examine these counter-narratives.
Yeah, this deep dive into Gareth Porter's work, it makes it pretty clear that the facts we were often given were, well, according to him, frequently manufactured or selectively leaked or sometimes outright misreported.
A sobering thought about how information is shaped.
Definitely. From that initial U.S. embargo, seemingly forcing Iran into self-sufficiency, kind of creating the very program it sought to prevent.
Right, the potential irony there.
To Israeli governments, according to the source, using alleged threats for unrelated political gains. To this demonstrably flawed intelligence, like the laptop documents, becoming the basis for major policy decisions and media hysteria, the pattern Porter lays out is really striking.
It is. It raises fundamental questions about intelligence assessment and public communication.
It reminds us, doesn't it, that being truly well-informed isn't just about consuming information. It's about critically examining where it comes from, what the biases might be, the agendas it might serve.
Absolutely. Critical thinking is key.
So here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to ponder. What other widely accepted narratives about major international crises might be ripe for a similar deep dive, if we dared to look beyond the headlines and really question the official line?
Challenging question.
And what responsibility do we, just as consumers of information, have in demanding a deeper, maybe more transparent inquiry into the facts, rather than simply accepting the narrative that's presented most loudly?
Yeah, something definitely worth thinking about.